Time for Under 30. So today we are looking at RKLB, which is having its best day in almost 2 years in September of 2021. It's up 23%, actually falling off of session highs here a bit. So to break down what's driving this nice momentum, I'd like to welcome in George Tsilis, senior markets correspondent for the network. So George, walk us through this story. This is a name we don't discuss very often because it's still, with a 23% move to the upside, we're at $5 essentially.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this one, but it's been a while. RKLB, which is a company that actually produces, manufactures, and sells satellite vehicles as well as imagery equipment and communications equipment, both in the public sector as well as the private sector. And it's catching a bid today on some actually pretty good news from the standpoint of total sales and some backlogs. They actually secured a contract for about $515 million from the U.S. government. One could surmise perhaps it's either NASA or the Department of Defense for 18 essentially aerial vehicles, space vehicles, if you will. And that is actually a pretty tremendous increase in their backlog, because if you consider the backlog prior to this deal, it was about $500 million. So it essentially doubles it to over $1 billion. And with that said, they are getting some analyst coverage as well as some upgrades. For instance, Cantor Fitzgerald increased their price circuit to $6. And one of the things about this business that I noticed is they actually are securing contracts for both the private sector and public sector of the United States, but also internationally. They secured a deal for the Korean government for some imagery equipment and some launches in that region of the world as well. So it's actually a company that's been growing. If you look at the backlog, which is over $1 billion, that's about 4 times their annual sales of about $230 million, with the sales estimated next year to be around $450 million. So you're essentially seeing a company that's growing nearly double its sales on a forward basis with some analyst coverage. There are 9 analysts that have coverage on the stock. From what I can tell, the median target in the next 12 months is just below $8 at $7.90. The low target is $5, and the high target is around $10. So when you have a small cap stock like this, around $2 billion, it really does help to have analyst coverage, because it gives you an idea that there's some visibility in the financial profile of a business like this.
Yeah, George, you mentioned Cantor has a price target. I think you said of 6 it was, but I'm looking at Citi a little bit below that, a neutral rating on RKLB with a price target of 5.25. But I'm also wondering, now forgive me, George, I'm not really up to date on this necessarily, but I've been hearing a lot about SpaceX, right? The Starlink, the satellite aspects there, and some of the U.S. government's dependency on, that got brought to light, right, with the war in the Middle East. Obviously, there was a lot of focus on that. But does this alleviate some of that dependence?
Well, I think so. I think at the end of the day, when you look at what qualifies for government contracts, ideally speaking, the government wants variety and, of course, multiple suppliers across different technologies. So I think there's room for a lot of additional suppliers, companies like RKLB on top of SpaceX. From what I understand, SpaceX is really focused on SATCOM, in other words, low orbit satellite communications, which eventually may end up displacing, tower-based communications or even 5G communications. It has still some latency, but nonetheless, it's actually picking up quite a bit of traction overall. So I think RKLB's focus more so is on imaging technologies, satellite imaging, if you will, as well as, aerial vehicles for space exploration, which might be a little bit different than what SpaceX provides the marketplace. So I think at the end of the day, there's certainly room for multiple contractors, at least in the public sector, alongside SpaceX's technologies, which in and of itself, the company is very well funded, considering it's got the backing of Elon Musk and, of course, Tesla.
So maybe apples and oranges in some ways there. I appreciate the clarity. But again, to your point, the total value of this contract, $515 million, doubling their sales, includes a base amount of $489 million and incentives and options totaling $26 million.
Yeah, I think if you just look at the contract alone and you look at it relative to total sales in the last year, it basically increases their backlog 4 times their sales.
Yeah,
so
that's significant.
It's getting closer. I think it's not profitable yet, but it's getting closer to potentially being free cash flow positive. So that typically is a prelude to profitability. So if you're looking at this company from a investment standpoint, watch the quarterly free cash flow numbers as they may improve.
All right, George, really great breakdown on an interesting name. I mean, I think that this story will be compelling to watch, obviously, into this new year. But appreciate the breakdown today. But of course, we appreciate the breakdown all year long here on Next Gen, always giving us the best insight on under 30. George Tsilis, senior markets correspondent.